you there? Are you?
Or are you fine where you are?
I can wait.
Hello, everyone. Welcome. It's my pleasure today to introduce our speaker, Guillermo Solana. A native of Madrid, Guillermo Solana has been artistic director at the Museo Thyssen-Bornemisza since 2005. Previously, he also served a long tenure, 20 years, or over 20 years, as professor of aesthetics and art theory at the Universidad Autónoma de Madrid, where he received his doctorate. Dr. Solana is a noted scholar of 19th century and modern art who has lectured extensively, authored numerous books, articles, and chapters. While at the Thyssen, he's curated many important exhibitions, including exhibitions featuring the work of Paul Gauguin in 2004, Vincent van Gogh in 2007, Camille Pissarro in 2013, and last year, an exhibition featuring works by Paul Cézanne. Dr. Solana has also curated the exhibition of modern drawings from the Abelló Collection, which, as many of you may remember, opened here at the Meadows Museum in 2008. Currently, he's working on an exhibition project titled Renoir's Caresse, Tactile Sense and Intimacy, scheduled to open in 2016. This evening, Dr. Solana will speak to us about modern works on view upstairs in our new exhibition of the Abelló Collection. Please join me in welcoming Guillermo Solana.
Thank you, Joel. Thank you, Carmen. Thank you, Mark, for inviting me here. And my apologies for speaking in English. I mean, in my broken stuttering English, be indulgent because it cost me an effort to try to. It is difficult when you are easy in your own language, when you are comfortable in your own language, when you are a fluent speech in your own language, to become so clumsy, so primitive, so in a different language. But I'll try my best. My only excuse for speaking to you in my broken English is having been invited by a great friend like Mark and being tempted by the prestige, of course, of this grand museum, which is the best museum of Spanish art out of Spain, definitely. I don't want to offer you a kind of very scholarly and pedantic explanation of the paintings in the wonderful galleries you've got there, but simply to take you for a short, I hope, walk through some of the highlights of the modern part of this grand exhibition of the Abelló Collection. Even if there are wonderful all masters things I would like to speak about, but there will be another lecture devoted to those all masters. For instance, the Juan de Flandes, which I remember discovering at the library of Abelló, like 15 years ago or 20 years ago, and it was such an impression, or the El Greco, which is a real jewel, or the Rivera, some other pieces. So let's start, if we can lower the lights, please. Let's start with picture of the collector at home, the collector's home itself, with this eccentric and intriguing way of disposing arranging the paintings there on the wall, combining, let's say, modern things, but in principle not closely related to each other at first sight. the two portraits by Goya at the sides, a portrait by Juan Gris in the center, and the triptych, the small triptych by Bacon beneath the Juan Gris. Goya, Bacon, Juan Gris, plus the two studies at the sides by Zacarias González Velázquez with Godfather and the Angels. Well, the whole reminded me of the walls of the fabulous Barnes Foundation, which used to be in Marion, and now it's in Philadelphia, to the dismay of the people of Marion. You know, the Dr. Barnes was known by the eccentric rules he imposed on the public exhibiting of his collection, and this hyper-symmetrical arrangement of the paintings, which is both hyper-formalistic and a bit crazy in a way, because it combined different sorts of things. For instance, in this case, there are the wall is composed mainly of Renoirs and Cézannes, which are not so easily combined, even if the two artists were friends. Sometimes the curators look down to collectors because they are not so knowledgeable, or at least they do not know how to explain with intellectual rigor their views. But I do think that there is some insight in the collector. There is some insight in the closeness of the art collector to his or her things, in this way of combining them crazily enough. Is not there something which can relate Goya and Bacon to each other? They are not connected in an obscure way. Let us take a look at the Goyas, the portraits. They are simple, sober, natural. They are, you know, the parents-in-law of Javier Goya, Goya's, the painter's son, 5 years after the wedding. Goya had painted a series of miniature portraits of the whole family of the in-laws, and 5 years after that he painted the portraits of this upper middle class couple who didn't suffer so much apparently from the war, because Juana had grown, how do you say, plumper, even in the toughest years of the war of independence against the French. The lace in the neck is emphasized because they ran business, a big shop of fine laces, of fine textiles. I don't know how to yeah, textiles, no? So that is the only allusion to their social status or so, because on for the rest, the portraits are very straight. They go to the face. They are frank, particularly the one of Juana Galarza, which is the more open. Well, near to that, the 3 studies for a portrait of Peter Bird look really awful, no? Really. Peter Beard was famous photographer devoted to photographing Africa, particularly, and he got to be a great friend of Francis Bacon because they both were very pessimistic about human nature, very fatalistic, and they thought everything was for the worst. And that is what Peter Beard says. And it seems that Bacon was particularly attached to this triptych, this small triptych, because Juan Abelló has told the anecdote, the story, that in his last years, the collectors were closely in touch with the artist, and Bacon approached them to buy the triptych back, to recover the triptych. And they asked him in exchange one of the portraits of the Pope Innocent X, which Bacon was about to get when he died, and the deal wasn't closed finally. But he was particularly attached to this triptych, which is very representative of a certain thread in Bacon's work. You know that he created dozens of triptychs along the years. First, from the 40s, smaller triptychs, and then since 1962, large triptychs, which were a way in which he kind of tried to go beyond easel painting, the classical quadrangle, the classical of the canvas, in search for a different horizon, but without getting entangled in a complex narrative thing. The triptych is not necessarily a narrative. It is simply multiplicity of images. In this case, for instance, it is ambiguous enough. It could be, for instance, the 3 ages of man, the classical topic of the 3 ages of man, or past, present, future. It could be something like something inspired in the photography of movement, in the beginning of the cinematography. Bacon was famously fascinated by the research of Edward Muybridge on capturing the movement of the animals and men, no? So it's a kind of cinematic series. There could be many things. It could be like the predella from an altarpiece, taken from an altarpiece, even except that the topic is not the adequate one for that. But we will be back to that topic of the relationship of the triptych and the altarpiece as a function, as a way of anyway. Getting back to Goya and Bacon. Goya and Bacon are going to be our first and last, the extremes in our walk through the exhibition there. No? The Goya is the door to modernity for Spanish art, for Spanish painting. Bacon, in this case, is rien ne va plus, the last term in this evolution. But they can be connected directly one to each other. And which is, where would you remember of the desastres de la guerra, pinturas negras, disparates, all the awful subject matter and the the violent way, the cruel way of depicting those obscene things that shouldn't be shown in Goya, which is what Goya and Bacon could have in common. The goring, no? This cruelty, this effusion of blood, the slaughterhouse, painting as a slaughterhouse. Well, in fact, Lucas Velázquez is an epigon and a successor of Goya, one of these romantic painters which in Spain worked over the topics extracted from Goya. In this case, for instance, the Tauromachia by Goya is in action, and treating the painting also with the liberty, the characteristic freedom of Goya himself. But the door to modernism in Spain, in Spanish painting, is not through Eugenio Lucas or through Alenza, another of these Goya-esque painters, not even through Mariano Fortuny, which was one brilliant, how do you say, malogrado, ill-fated, painted in the second half of the 19th century in Spain. If we follow a French pattern, a Frenchified pattern, a French way of telling the story of modern art, we should start, obviously, by the landscape, no? And following the pattern, the way the story of modern painting is told in French painting is starting with Barbizon and going to the Impressionist, no? Manet is a very important figure, but it is not exactly fitting into that scheme. The patriarch of modern tradition in France during the 19th century, following this scheme of following the story of the landscape, would be Pissarro, of course. First, maybe Corot, and then Pissarro. Well, the role which Pissarro played in France as being the initiator, the precursor of the whole Impressionistic revolution, was played in Spain in a much more modest measure and way by Aureliano de Beruete. Aureliano de Beruete is still not very well-known painter abroad, out of Spain, not even in Spain. Even in Spain, he has been half forgotten. I plan to do a retrospective of Beruete in a couple of years from now. Maybe we could talk about bringing it to Dallas. Beruete was not just a painter, he was a doctor in law, he was a very competent writer, a collector. He was well off, he was affluent, he could buy things by his colleagues in need, he could help many of his colleagues. He supported famously Sorolla in his early steps, and Sorolla learned a lot from Beruete and received from Beruete his whole clientele, his clients for portraits, for instance, which was a key resource for a painting starting in the battle of getting a name. The entrance of Beruete, well, this is one of the works I love most in the exhibition. It's really a wonderful painting. But it is it is not a bold painting for the 1895. It's if you can think of the things which were happening in France for this, by this time, it was the Impressionism was something already passé. Van Gogh had died already, and Seurat, and it was Cézanne who made the day in these years, no? Which was obviously much beyond these formulas. The construction with these horizontal stripes, this kind of classical composition discipline of Berruete comes very much straight from Corot. He acknowledged that. Berruete was very attached. He confessed to the first Corot, to the Corot of the 20s, who worked in the open air in Italy, in Rome particularly. Not to the later Corot of the souvenir, of these paintings from memory, vague, diffuse. No, he liked the naturalistic phase of Corot, but with this classical discipline in it. And it's, I think, Berruete is a very effective disciple of Corot in this case. Even the bridge is a typical motif which appears in many paintings by Corot. Now I bring you something from the wonderful collection of the Meadows, the Blind Man of Toledo. It was Berruete who took for the first time Sorolla to Toledo and showed to him the place, the legendary landscape of Toledo, which had been depicted famously by El Greco, for instance, the dramatic cleavage of El Tajo, all these, the views from the other side of El Tajo. But please consider how there is such a gap between the classical serenity and with the city in the distance, with the church of San Juan de los Reyes there at the summit, and all these plains, layers very well ordered, and this sudden immersion of the beholder, of the viewer, into the space. No? The spectator in this case is like absorbed into the space, and we go straight to the end of this lane, this road close to the river. The connecting the first how would you say, the first plane of the painting and the most distant places is the ambition of Sorolla, and he does it with a boldness, with a daring that Berruete probably could not conceive of. There was an influencing back of Sorolla on Berruete. Sorolla learned a lot of things from Berruete, but Berruete, I think, as a result of dealing with young, bolder painters as Sorolla, modified his approach to a space, and to the handling of paint itself is quite different in this. This is the other Berruete which is in the exhibition, and you can notice, you can see how different they are from each other. The first classical view from afar of the Iglesia de San Juan de los Reyes with this big sky, and this turbulent landscape of the Sierra del Guadarrama, which is like a bit of, it's, I think it could be called post-impressionistic. It is midway between Pissarro and almost Cain-Soutin. There is a certain dirtiness in the handling of paint. There is a messiness in the handling of paint, which is much bolder than. Modernity in Spain, in painting, in art, received the name of modernismo. Modernismo is the name of the equivalent of modernism in English. But modernismo in Spain was both in literature and in painting a mix of many different and very different trends. For instance, in the modernista landscape in Spain, we've got things closer to European symbolism than to anything else, like the later gardens by Rossignol. Rossignol was a guy who started in Paris with Casas, making open-air painting, not exactly close to the impressionist, to the mainstream of impressionism like, say, Monet, but rather to the more moderate